see what I do.
I'm going to get off headphones for a moment. I need to clean my glasses.
Oh, go right ahead.
Be back.
Not a problem. Hey, Ethan.
Hey,
How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
All right. So this is the warm up before we get started. That looks good. Nice. You've set that up well. Yeah, we're going to start. I'm going to wait for Mr. So I said 13 years. I was wrong. He's been doing Bitcoin for 8. It's that I haven't spoken to him really in 13 years. That's where I got confused. I called him the other day because, I do a bunch of things, but one of the things I work in video, and I get calls all the time for different things. I'm working on a music video right now, an international, for a solo artist in Africa, and she's doing this big, huge tour. It's like a big thing. I did her first video when she was 19. Now she's 39. But I get a call for someone who's got a feature film and wants someone to edit it. And this guy used to work for me. He's like worked for me for years. I called him up to say, hey, I got this big job. Too busy. And he goes, no, I'm not editing anymore. I said, really? Why is that? So I'm 100% in on Bitcoin. And I go, Bitcoin, what's going on? And boy, I was on the phone with him for like 2 hours. And so this guy, since 2008, so you've just run into like the mother lode when it comes to understanding Bitcoin. Daryl,
2013. Hi, Ethan.
2013. There you go.
Yeah. I wasn't there before Bitcoin started, which would be advantageous, I guess.
Right. Awesome. And we have a couple. Yeah. We'll have a couple cats on it too. Daryl's got a couple cats in the background.
Yeah, you're hearing them, huh?
I like them. I like the sound effects. Yeah, it's good. It adds to the aunts. So let's before we start. I think your picture looks pretty good. Ethan's looks fine. We just tweaked Daryl's. So I'm recording both. Well, it's going to be in Zoom. And then in the Zoom, we also have, I'll be taking that and dropping it into a podcast. So it'll end up on a YouTube channel and it'll end up in, online as a podcast. And then just give me you can give me the blurt that you want to put for representing yourself. Mm-hmm. Send me that and I'll send that, whatever you want to put in the description, I'll add that to the podcast and in the YouTube channel. Okay. So let's just mark this. Today's March 20 or March 12, 21. I'm here with Daryl Giors and with Ethan Turer. And Ethan, you give me permission to use your video?
Yeah.
Your sound, okay. And Daryl, I don't have to worry about it.
You knew I was going to say no, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Let's get started real quick. First of all, let me introduce Daryl. Daryl and I have been buddies for a long time. Daryl Giors. We go back 20 years, and we worked together on a lot of productions. He worked on productions that I did for Absolute Films, which I still I'm running a production company. Always got something burning on either a documentary or current projects, something that's been lifelong for like 30 years. I kind of carried on the father son farm, and I haven't spoken to Daryl in a while, and he kind of shocked me when I offered him a job, and he says, I'm all in on Bitcoin right now. I'm really not focused on anything else. And then he went on like a 2-hour dissertation about Bitcoin. It's like, oh, wow, this guy, I gotta do a podcast just on him. And then I'm teaching podcasting right now as one of my sidelines at school, actually my main line. And we've got, 100 students doing podcasts. One of the things is you got to collaborate. You got to find people out there and go do a show with them. That's how you multiply your whole game. And so I popped on, and you're the first person I saw, and you were looking for interviews. I go, here, look, let me show you how it happens. So you're the living example of manifestation, seeing it, doing it, and then acting on it. And here we are, Ethan Turer. So Ethan Turer responded, or I responded to Ethan Turer's desire to have a podcast. And look, bleep, right in front of us, here's the podcast, Living Out in Living Color. So tell us a little about yourself. I mean, your book, is, I think, the most apropos thing. As soon as I saw what it was that you were behind, the next gold rush, how crypto will change everything. That's the conversation I was having with Daryl. He's all game over. It's like, I've been locked on this for a long time. He goes, I'm not giving you any financial advice, but it's not a bad thing. In fact, I'm all in, and I'm riding it as far as I can ride this. So
I think that would be a good thing to start with on your behalf, is to inform the audience that we are not giving any investment advice at all during this entire podcast.
Thank you for that. That's always, that got me in trouble in my life. As it was worst. It wasn't with my own family. When you give financial advice and it doesn't play out like you thought it would, and then you realize, some people aren't gamblers like maybe I am. I'm okay to gamble and, high stakes, low stakes. I mean, I kind of know what I'm willing to lose, but that doesn't work for the next person. When they listen to you and they see like, well, you're doing pretty good. And they're all in all of a sudden. Now they're like, well, and it doesn't go well. Now so yeah, absolutely. I'm clear now as an example of anything in the stock market, anything financially. It's money is like going to a casino, and if you understand the house and you're in on the house, maybe you got an advantage, right? So I think with Bitcoin, you can say that you're part of the house. It's something that internally, it's a gamble if you understand it. Well, we don't know we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So yeah, Daryl's absolutely right. That's the first thing he told me. He goes, look, I'm going to tell you a bunch of stuff, but first off, I'm not giving any financial advice. I go, wow, that was smart. This guy is not going to be responsible consciously for anything that leads me to like empty my bank account. But so with that, why don't you give us a little background, Ethan?
Sure. I just wanted to add real quick that when I've been interviewing people for my book, that was one of the things that came up, was that this isn't financial advice. This is for educational purposes only. I think it's really important that you start off that way so that everyone's on the same page. So yeah, let me give a quick background on my book. This is something that I had an idea for this book 2 years ago, and it wasn't until the pandemic where I thought, you know what, maybe I should actually work on this. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 5 months, is typing away. I've written over 40,000 words. I'm in this program called the Creator Institute. So I get to work with a lot of amazing authors and editors. And my plan is to publish in August of this year. So that's just the quick background. The idea for the book, The Next Gold Rush, I will say is that I, became fascinated with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in 2018. All right, and that there's like a bubble where everyone wanted to get in on Bitcoin. No one really knew what it was. I was starting to go down that rabbit hole back then, and a lot of my friends also were really curious, but no one really knew what it was. And the more I learned about it, the more fascinated I became, and it's become a common part of my life for like 3 years now. So much so that I wrote a book to try to explain it to other people, because I feel like you start to have the same conversations over and over again. And the best way you can educate people is at scale with a book or a class, a podcast. And so I really think that the more people that know about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, the better people will be, because of the power this technology has for decentralizing. And I'm sure we'll get into this more, especially because of Daryl's shirt. But yeah, I really think that it's more about empowering the people with cryptocurrency, and that's why it's so amazing.
Just to launch, kind of for those that aren't up to speed on Bitcoin, just it's how it entered into the whole into the arena. the 2008 uh, Satoshi Nakamoto shows up, and he a year later, that's 2008, 2009, he kind of dropped the open source where people could really get a handle on it. And then fast forward to the the black market, where it really showed its true value and its kind of proof of concept. um, uh, and the Silk Road just actually showed that what the potential was. And then the difference between Bitcoin and the fiat system is the fiat system has no transparency, only to the bankers. So there's no checks and balances. It's whatever they tell you it is. Whereas Bitcoin is really transparent. We don't know who owns it. We don't really know how who's making the transaction, but you can see completely every detail of the transaction. So just on its base value in terms of honesty, it's such a more credible uh, financial ledger just out the gate. So I think if Daryl really, he's like an early miner. He would, I'd be interested in taking us kind of at the beginning of your interest in it. What drew you into it, and then what did it take to set up your mining?
Okay, well, I have a story that a lot of people will recount in that I didn't take it seriously the first couple times I heard about Bitcoin. I was like, what is this magic internet money? And people waste energy to mine it. It sounds like a really big squandering of energy and pollution. And why would you possibly do that? Until one time in 2013, actually, it was nearly 8 years ago, because it must have been March 31st that this happened. I heard a little bit more about the fundamentals of how it works, and that inspired me to go look at the white paper. And after looking at the white paper, it just started dawning on me that, wait, this is something totally new, because as you mentioned, with the Federal Reserve and how fiat money is managed, with Bitcoin, there's nobody in control of it. Basically, you have miners who are securing the blockchain, and we don't need to go into the weeds about what all these terms necessarily mean. But just that it's an open ledger that has an accounting of who sent who different denominations of Bitcoin, and currently who owns what. And that's secured on something called the blockchain, and people mine that, but anyone can mine it if you have the proper equipment. So it's this democratic thing. There's no one top down saying you're going to be a miner and you're going to be a node and all this other stuff. Just anyone can voluntarily jump in and out of this network as they please. And also the creators of it, whether it was an individual or a group, known as Satoshi Nakamoto, left the stage without revealing who they are. And that way, if they happen to have some secret backdoor to the entire enterprise, no one was going to be able to coerce them into giving it up. And since it's also open source, it can be analyzed, and we know there's not a backdoor. So it's this pretty egalitarian way of bringing money back to the people. And once that dawned on me, I thought, wow, I got to get my hands on some, because this sounds really important. It also didn't hurt that in previous times when I heard about Bitcoin, it was probably under $1. And I have a thing where I sometimes do like science work on my computer, where I just let the computer run on folding proteins and stuff like that for medical science. And it's not anything that is hands-on or whatever. But the first couple times I heard about Bitcoin, I thought, well, would it be selfish of me just to mine some Bitcoin on my own and maybe make $2 or $3 a day? It probably would have been several Bitcoin a day mining it. And I thought, you know what, I'll just keep donating to science, because I don't need that $3 or whatever it is. But then this other time in 2013, when it came back to my attention, it was about like $50, $60 in the marketplace. And I'm like, how does it go from under $1 to $50 or $60 in a couple of years? So at the time, there weren't really great ways to get a hold of it. There's a thing called local Bitcoins, where you can take cash to a center where one of these meetings is going on, And you basically do it like almost like it's a drug deal or something, where it's like, hey, I brought you a load of cash and you're going to send me some Bitcoin and I'll check it out on my phone and make sure I actually received it. And then all's good. That seems a little iffy, you know? And then at the time, there was an exchange in Japan called Mt. Gox, which was formerly a Magic the Gathering trading card exchange. And to get my money over there from my bank, I had to use basically like some Russian version of PayPal. And I'm dealing with an exchange in Japan. And it just seems so like, you know, there are so many ways my money could get lost along the way. It's going to take forever to get there. It just seems so convoluted that I came to the conclusion that my best way to obtain something that early on would be to mine. And so the next day I went out and bought a computer and slapped like 3 high-end GPUs into it. And I started mining Litecoin because that was actually more profitable to mine on that kind of hardware at the time. And then I could sell the Litecoin for Bitcoin. And that's how I got my first.
Wow. So how long did it take to make your first profit on it? To come up with a blockchain?
I actually did a boneheaded thing at the beginning. I was solo mining because I had this understanding that there's a difficulty retarget, and that means that it'll become harder to mine as more people are mining. And I thought that I had a pretty good chance of mining my own block of Litecoin early on. And I probably spent like a day and a half doing that. And then I realized that the difficulty retargeted before I thought it would. I thought it was going to be like a week away, and it turned out it was only a couple days away. So then the difficulty got hard enough that I wasn't likely to mine my own block anymore. So I started mining on pools. And this is kind of getting into the weeds, but basically a pool is a way of everybody who's on a mining pool is putting in effort to solve the next block. And even though your little effort might not have much chance of solving a block even in the next year or whatever, you're still contributing to the group effort. So it's a way of distributing the risk of not finding a block at all. And you're going to get a little bit for the effort that you put in. So it's a way of like, kind of like an insurance thing. Like you're minimizing the risk for everyone involved by giving them a little piece of the action for what they contribute.
Right. Interesting.
So it was probably like half a week before I actually had something I could sell, you know?
So half a week.
Because I played my cards wrong at the beginning, you know, live and learn.
Yeah. Wow. So you saw reward in it. That's pretty cool. Yeah. That was pretty cool. I mean, and during the so have you single-handedly ever created a block?
Not on the Bitcoin chain. No.
No, I didn't think so. Yeah.
No.
That's interesting. Then when did you swap over to Bitcoin?
Later on, I pre-ordered an ASIC from a company called Butterfly Labs, which turned out to be pretty crooked. They were actually on the mainnet mining with people's machines before they shipped them to them, which was the double whammy of you received your machine late, and they were using your machine to increase the difficulty, which would mean you could mine less once you actually got your hands on it. So, you know, and then later on, I dealt with I got an Antminer S2, Bitmain makes that. And, you know, I was mining on pools, never solved a block by myself, but, you know, after I bought that machine, probably mined, you know, 5 or 6 Bitcoin off of it, something like that. Now, what I want to mention for, you know, because I think the book is probably geared toward people just entering the space. Am I right about that?
I actually wrote 3 sections. So the first section is for people that want to enter it. Okay. And the last section is more advanced topics. So.
Okay. That's good to know, because I think that, you know, probably a lot of your listeners, Romeo, are going to be beginners just looking into the space. And I get the question a lot of the time, should I mine? Like you mined, maybe I should mine, you know?
Right.
And I just want to let people know that, like, in almost all instances, anytime I mined, I would have been better off just putting the money into buying the coin and sitting on it, doing something called dollar cost averaging, where you just set a schedule like, hey, I can afford to put $20 in at the end of every week. And if you just do that and build up an accumulation, that usually works best for someone who's not going to be actively day trading or whatever.
Right.
And the mining is set up to actually be fairly slim margins is very competitive. And as of today, it's extremely industrialized. Like if you don't have access to cheap energy or warehouses where you can put oodles and oodles of these specific mining machines, which by the way, the mining machines that mine Bitcoin right now, that's all they do. You can't repurpose them later on to do something else. And in like a year or two, when they're outdated and they're consuming more energy than the brand new ones coming out, they just get thrown away. So that's what you're competing with, you know,
Right.
an industrialized thing where they're going to have hundreds of machines versus you in your home. The one caveat I'll put to that is if you're interested in learning about the ins and outs of mining and how things go, it's a great education. Go ahead and do it, you know. But if you are looking at trying to maximize your returns, unless you're going to build a big business out of it, just buy some crypto. You know, that's I can tell you from my experience that would have been better for me. But back in the day, there wasn't a Coinbase and there wasn't Gemini Exchange and places like that, eToro, you know, all these different places you can just hook up your bank account or your credit card and buy some. So mining was kind of like my foot in the door. Eventually it became too expensive on the hardware I had and it all got shelved. And, you know, now I might do it on a whim if there's some new interesting coin out there, but not very often anymore.
Yeah. Wow. That's some good background. What you got any questions about that, Ethan?
I haven't mined myself, like personally, so I don't have any experience there. But from what I've researched, it sounds like you need to have like the proper setup for it to work. Like I think people were like buying gaming, like either trying to do like gaming cards and trying to mine that way, and it's just you need to have so much CPU power in order to mine nowadays that, like I think like Daryl was saying, it just doesn't make sense to do it. So I mean, at least not for Bitcoin. Maybe there's other cryptocurrencies where, you know, it doesn't cost as much energy to mine, and so every cryptocurrency has its own network that needs mining in some way. So just because you can't do it on Bitcoin doesn't mean that mining isn't a valuable tool in the cryptocurrency space. But I wouldn't know personally about, like, I can't say, hey, check out this cryptocurrency because this will be the best use of your mining capabilities. So that's kind of all I have to add there.
What did in your book, you know, it's interesting, you know, it's like doing a thesis and you're with all these like-minded people that are kind of to the story. What did you find and what was like your revelation when you said, wow, this is for real? I'm in. This is like
Romeo, just a technical thing. You were breaking up during that, so I don't know on your end locally if you're going to get the whole question, but you might want to repeat it.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'll slow down. My connection isn't the best, unfortunately. I'm just during your writing process and putting that book together. What was like your aha moment that like it all added up to like this is something worth investigating?
Yeah. So I kind of had an idea for my book before I started writing. I would say that my aha moment was realizing that in order to explain this to a general audience, you kind of had to work backwards. And so in order to get to like the advanced topics at the end, I had to really start at Satoshi Nakamoto and Bitcoin and what that meant, and then build like with Ethereum as like a way for decentralized applications to exist through smart contracts. And the more terminology I would add to the vernacular of my book, the more I realized, oh, I really need to make this as simple as possible and kind of create a stepping stone of information so that you can have these conversations. So the aha moment for me was, where do I start? And Bitcoin was obviously the best starting point, but it wasn't really the story of Bitcoin. It was the story of Satoshi Nakamoto, I think, was the most fascinating thing, because he's just an alias, or she. We really don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto is. And if you start off with, wow, that's the foundation of this crazy cool like internet bubble that we like live in, like that we still don't know the founder of the fundamental cryptocurrency. Like that's the craziest, like coolest part of this rabbit hole, I think.
Right. And then to know he walked off with like, how many hundreds of, what was it, 100? A million? Was it a million? I don't know what it was, how many million, but he had like
Uh,
cleaned house, right?
Yeah, I don't know the exact number of Bitcoin that were mined by Satoshi Nakamoto, but it he would be like or they would be a billionaire
Right.
easily, especially because it's over $50,000 a
Right.
Bitcoin now.
Yeah, I'm sure.
One of the interesting things about that is that Satoshi's stash has not been touched to my knowledge. So it's just sitting there. And if that Bitcoin ever moves, it might have a weird effect on the price, probably just temporarily. But some people are considering it that it might just be dead Bitcoin because if they either lost the private key or their password to get to it, or since we don't know who it is, if they're no longer with us, then
Right.
that might be coin that's just going to sit there forever because no one knows how to access it.
How spooky is that? I don't quite can't wrap my brain around the idea that you can lose a password and never see it again, that
Right.
there's no backward engineering on that.
That happens a lot, actually.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I know. Well, it happens to us, but you'd think, I guess you can't call customer service. Do you know what I mean? Could somebody go in the back door and just see like what that original entry was?
Well, what I will say is that a lot of people these days are recommending that if you know who you are and you're technical enough, you could get what's called a hardware wallet. And they usually have a pretty simplified setup where it's just a little computing unit that attaches to a computer through USB. And it does the signing for doing the Bitcoin transactions on the unit. So it never actually has to touch the internet. And these things are usually pretty secure. And during the setup phase, when it generates a new wallet for you, it'll give you a mnemonic phrase of either 12 or 24 words from a specific dictionary. And then it also usually comes with a little card. You can write them down. Or some people for security will stamp them on like stainless steel. And you put that in a fire safe or somewhere you can get to, a safety deposit box, whatever. And those 12 or 24 words are basically your keys to the kingdom. You can smash that hardware wallet with a hammer, get a new one, get a compatible wallet, whether it's software or hardware, put in those 12 words, and there's all your funds again. So it's not exactly rocket science, but it's not the kind of thing that someone who's brand new to technology is going to really grok. And for
Right.
some people, it might be better to just use a custodial account like Coinbase or something like that, where if you bought your coins on there, you can leave them on there. If you're very sure you won't mess it up, try to get it on some wallet you have on either your phone or a hardware wallet where you'll manage the mnemonic phrase that gets you back in. But if you think you can't do that, if you don't live in a secure environment, or if you just don't think you have the chops to manage it, then keep it on a custodial exchange, because that's at least good enough security. Bad things could happen. There could be government seizure and who knows what else. But those are the risks you would take versus the risks you take upon yourself when you try to manage the private key by yourself. Then it's all on your shoulders. And if you're constantly losing your email password, you might not be a good candidate to attempt to take that responsibility.
Right.
I mean, if you have any like proficiency with the internet, I would say it's not that difficult to have your own wallet. And it's getting easier every year too. Hardware wallet, like I showed mine. I have a Trezor wallet. I bought it actually so that I can learn about it and write about it for my book. But I would say that the easiest thing you do is buy, or not buy, like an online wallet. Like, so if you get a online wallet, it's still the same process. You have to you're responsible for your private key. But I will say that it's still safer than keeping it on an exchange. And exchanges have been known to be hacked the most. Because if you think about it from a hacker's perspective, the best ROI is hacking an exchange because they have all of the cryptocurrency. And so if you're storing your cryptocurrencies there, then that's the most exposure you could get to losing your investment. So definitely look into getting a wallet, whether it's hardware or software.
Yeah,
So-
I can't disagree with that. I just say though that like you have to just assure yourself that you're ready for it though, you know. But if you've been using the internet a long time, you're probably fine, you know. So
Yeah. Well, so what do you think of just the last kind of the big leap that took us into like another orbit and then the correction it's going through? What what brought that about, and what what do you think is in store for Bitcoin?
I can jump in if
sure,
you
yeah,
want, Daryl. So I think the difference between like this, I would say, pump or rush of investment versus like 2018, that bubble, is the institutional buy-in. The fact that there's, you know, companies like PayPal and Tesla that are putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet, it's adding more credibility to this network. So adding more credibility means more trust, means more like regular investors are going to get into it. So there's this virtuous cycle that's happening, because also I think was that there's this new concept of Federal Reserve like coins. I forget the exact acronym, but you know, even the Federal Reserve, who is like the antithesis of cryptocurrency, in my opinion, they are getting in on having their own cryptocurrency because blockchain actually is very useful to them in tracking, you know, the many transactions that exist at that level.
Right. You can imagine letting the Federal Reserve in on this game, that they'd figure out a way to turn it into a fiat, device. I mean, they can't, the kind of style of how they operate is kind of dyed in the wool. They could never they could never do crypto the way Bitcoin's being done, for example.
well,
Or could they?
Well, I think like a good starting place would be, is it going to be open source? I don't think so, because the NSA and a whole bunch of other people want a backdoor into the thing. So they're never going to release the source code to that thing. And you know that no matter how they pose it as being open and decentralized, it'll be anything but. You know, they're always going to have a way to manipulate it. And so in a fair competition between that and something that actually is decentralized, I know which one I would put my dollars behind, so to speak.
Right.
The acronym I was looking for, it's the was it the Federal Reserve? I just looked it up. Sorry, I lost it. Oh, CBDC. So it's
Oh,
the
yeah.
central bank digital currency, and that's like a new phenomenon that hasn't existed before in this space. Um,
Almost sounds like a marijuana stock or
Yeah, right. I want some CBD coin,
yeah, exactly.
which I'm sure there probably is one, because there was a cannabis coin back in the day. I mean, it's not like these coins go away, but they drop sometimes to nearly zero. And then, you know, all the exchanges drop them because there's no trading action, et
Yeah.
cetera.
Yeah. What do you make of all the competition? Who stands anywhere near Bitcoin that you can basically trust, that I mean, you personally have like you've had a good experience with?
Well, you want to take it, Ethan, first?
Sure. I mean,
All right.
if you look at CoinMarketCap, Ethereum is number 2 in terms of overall market capitalization. But no one really comes close other than that I can think of. I mean, Bitcoin Cash is Bitcoin essentially before the fork. So that in a way is the closest to Bitcoin, but they kind of lost their power, the network. And so they've been hacked multiple times. They have the 51% attack. So I don't know if anyone comes close to actually taking over Bitcoin. I've heard many people claim that they're going to be the cryptocurrency that does that. It's just a hard thing to kind of imagine, because you need to get Bitcoin in order to get into this space. It's really still like the godfather cryptocurrency. And until that changes, I don't see how anyone can overcome Bitcoin.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that statement, especially after seeing so many other so-called competing coins just kind of dwindle into obscurity. There are some that tend to stay around. As mentioned before, Ethereum has a lot of really interesting capabilities to do smart contracts. It's built differently from Bitcoin. In a way, you could say that Bitcoin is built simply with a set of scripting that can do some things, but it can't do certain complicated smart contracts. And that's more of a feature because that makes it a lot easier to analyze a contract and tell exactly what it's going to do and how long it'll take to execute. But something like Ethereum is Turing complete, which means it's a completely programmable computer that exists distributed online. And when you give somebody that much power, you don't know if the script will eventually result in an infinite loop that'll just keep eating up computational power. And you can never really tell exactly when it's going to end because it's Turing complete. Like those two things just go hand in hand. So I consider Ethereum to be very interesting, but consider it maybe like a higher risk thing to go into because they seem to be about developing things kind of like Facebook does. It's like move fast and break things. And if a smart contract collapses, oops, we'll do the next one better. You know, and they also proven that they do not believe in immutability, which is something that Bitcoin has. Basically, after a block has been cemented in the blockchain back an hour or more, it's very, very difficult to do all of the proof of work necessary to go back and change those transactions. But on Ethereum, in some of the earlier days, there was a smart contract called the DAO that people were getting maybe a little too ambitious with it because people kept, like the people developing the DAO were expecting, oh, we might get a few $100,000 invested in this thing and it's going to do automated trading and, you know, you'll receive dividends from it. And it's going to be kind of like a corporation on the internet that doesn't have any employees. It's just running off of scripts, you know, sounds really cool. However, people, you know, it caught fire. And after a while, there were hundreds of millions of Ethereum vested in this thing. And somebody found a back door pretty soon after launch where they were just siphoning off all the money. And what the Ethereum developers decided to do was we're going to roll back to before the money started being siphoned off and close down that DAO script. And then we're going to start from there again. And by the way that Ethereum's constructed, they didn't have to roll back other transactions that happened after that point. They could actually go back to the DAO specific transactions, cancel those, and then start the blockchain from there again. But that caused a fork because there were some people who were more purists and they were saying, look, that's not playing by the rules. You know, all along the developers were saying a script is a script, the script is law. And if somebody abused the script in some way no one foresaw, that's still fair play. So then there was a fork called Ethereum Classic that was born right at that moment. But the point that I'm going to come back to, though, is that Ethereum has demonstrated that if there are enough big players in the space who get burnt by something that goes wrong, they have a history of going back and changing something.
Right.
And there's a huge difference between cannot change something, as in the Bitcoin blockchain, versus there's history of doing a change. So if somebody finds these developers and wants to threaten them with a big old lawsuit, and they're before a judge, and the judge asks, hey, can you roll back this transaction for these people? They have to answer yes, because we've done it before. But if they ever find out who started Bitcoin, anyone, you know, that there's like, say, you know, God forbid a terrorist is paid with some Bitcoin and someone wants to roll back that transaction, you can get all the people who are running exchanges on Bitcoin and all the miners and say, hey, can we roll back this transaction that went to this bad person? And all of them can straight-faced say, no, we can't. And that's a big, big difference. So
It's locked. Yeah. That's interesting. Wow. That sure makes Bitcoin unique. You know, it's interesting that you couldn't do like such a, you know, just a clone of Bitcoin and follow kind of everything just slightly different? I mean, I wonder why they would be writing all this other script for all these other coins unless there was something nefarious kind of floating in the background. I
Well,
mean,
like thousands of them are copies of Bitcoin. They just change a few parameters. And
right.
even Litecoin started out as they just tweaked some of the variables on Bitcoin and ran their own chain. They did move to a different proof of work, which was what they call ASIC resistant. Because we were talking earlier about mining, that if you just have general computer hardware, you can't really effectively mine Bitcoin. You have to have specialized hardware that does only Bitcoin mining. So there was a proof of work called Script that they made for Litecoin, which meant that it basically could run on general gaming GPUs. And it would be difficult to make an ASIC out of it. But eventually people made ASICs, and now it's like you can't even really mine that without using one of those either. So
Wow.
but
Interesting.
like so many of these coins are basically just a little tweak on Bitcoin. Like they'll have like instead of a block every 10 minutes, they might say, oh, we want faster transactions, so we're gonna have a block every minute. And then instead of the block reward starting at 50, they might start it at 200, and then there are going to be more coins in that universe.
Right.
So, but a lot of those clone coins haven't really shown their worth in the marketplace because they're not doing anything new, and they always pale in terms of the security model because they don't have the brute force of the network that's behind Bitcoin mining that.
Right. Interesting. Now, in your book, Ethan, what's your favorite chapter?
That's a good question. I would say that my favorite chapter is about influencers and followers and how cryptocurrency will disrupt that space. I can get into that a little more. So the way that I see it, the evolution of like coins, if you think about it, like we're thinking about coins at like a company level, right? Usually currency is at a national level. And so now ICOs exist. And so companies can now create their own currency, right? That's a relatively new concept. I mean, gift cards, I guess, kind of technically count as currency, but really bad one. And so companies can create their own coins. I imagine people will be able to create their own currency soon. That's like the next evolution of this space. And so in my influencer follower chapter, I kind of talk about social media and how the relationships between the two parties, it's not really being capitalized as well as it could be with cryptocurrency. So if an influencer had their own coin, they could have their followers buy that currency and essentially create like value that way on the internet. And I know there are a lot of people that are kind of working with this idea of people having their own coins on social media, like musicians will have their own currency, like very niche groups. But I was thinking more at a broad sense that people in any sense, but specifically influencers, would be able to use this technology to disrupt how we use social media.
I like that. That's a pretty insightful little angle on something that I haven't heard about. Why not? I mean, it makes perfect sense, right? What do you think of that, Daryl?
Actually, I think I want to pass this back to Ethan because I was going to ask if you, because this is such a fast moving space, and I'm sure you're going to be writing this book way up to the deadline and changing things because there's always new stuff happening. But similar to that, are you going to be talking about NFTs in any of your chapters there?
Yeah, I know. It's funny. That's come up a lot recently. I haven't directly written about that yet. I do have an investing chapter, which I will probably add a little piece on NFTs. But from my understanding, like non-fungible tokens, there's still a lot of, how do I put this? Still a lot of room for people to be taken advantage of because you're not actually buying like that good. So let me take a step back. So NFTs are a way to create a coin that's like you can't replicate it, and so that's perfect for like artwork, right? And so if you have an artist who's trying to sell their artwork, they could sell it with a NFT, but you have to trust that they're not going to resell it. So there's kind of like a double spend problem with NFTs in a way, because you could create copies, and I've seen like there's some artwork that was like millions of dollars. I forget how much, maybe Daryl can add the exact number, but someone sold artwork for like 60 something million dollars, and it's the highest thing ever sold. And then almost immediately someone created a copy and tried to sell a copy of it for like 100 grand. And so that's kind of the problem, is that even though it's like secure in the fact that no one else can get a copy of that coin, that token, the artwork isn't secure. Like you don't actually own that artwork. And so someone could try to like replace it, like replicate it. So there's a lot of, from my understanding, there's still a lot of wiggle room in terms of like how we can protect like this space. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but you can say that to cryptocurrency in general. So, you know.
I think what you're kind of getting at is that there's a problem, and this is what I always saw would be a problem with doing things like NFTs, because they've been attempted for a long time. The idea is that you're going to attach some physical commodity into the blockchain, and then how are you going to verify when you have various different networks that are independently working? How do you verify that this physical item isn't accounted for on some other chain? And that becomes a problem of duplication, as you're pointing out. Like, and then even on the same chain, who's the arbiter to say that this one item is too similar to, or the exact same item on the same chain? So it has escaped me how you secure things like NFTs, but they sure are getting popular. In fact, like I'm looking at the cover of your book there and thinking, you know, you could sell that as an NFT. And that doesn't mean that that's the only copy of that image that'll be on the internet. But somebody could demonstrate by having that token and say, look, I own that book cover, and they can sell it to someone else. And I understand on some of these chains, like you would be the originator of that NFT. And if somebody resells it, you get a percentage of the resale price. So if the price keeps going up and it keeps changing hands, you keep getting paid for it. So it's an interesting opportunity for artists. I'm not going to knock it. But again, there are security problems in the real world, because like blockchain does a good job of securing its ledger and the transactions that are therein. But when you're securing physical items in the real world and digital items that can be copied anywhere, and someone else could say, falsely claim they're the artist and make an NFT out of it, that opens up a whole other realm of security that isn't so easy to solve with math problems, you know?
Right. And I feel bad in some certain like cases where people hear about something, it gets hyped up, right? This happens a lot with the internet. You see like the hype, everyone's talking about it. No one wants to like miss out. So there's this FOMO aspect. And so without really understanding what NFTs are, you want to buy them. And so that's where it becomes a gamble. You're not really investing, you're gambling, because like if you don't really understand the technology, like it's the same thing with my book where I try to explain investing, but in order to understand investing, you have to understand the fundamentals of what a blockchain is. And so it's the same thing with NFTs. If you don't understand a blockchain, you don't understand that it's not actually, you know, the actual physical like item is not protected, like in a sense that it's just a record of it. Like you're securing a record of ownership, but that doesn't mean that you actually own the good in real life. Like there's a lot of like gray area here. And so you need to understand a lot just to be able to buy an NFT. And I don't think people are doing the education part. They're just buying because of the hype, which I don't recommend.
Yeah. And a lot of people own various versions of Pepe the Frog, you know, because of this. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, look, I'm an old precious metal guy, and I'm like, I like tangibly holding it in my hand. I mean, you have to think of like, I mean, that's something that, and you know, at the end of the day, you have to weigh out fiat currency, Bitcoin, and then, you know, precious metals. And, you know, precious metals become literally, it's wealth preservation. You know, what are you going to do? Run around with, you know, 1,000 ounces or 100-ounce bars and stuff? I mean, you can't really do anything with it, but you certainly can preserve your wealth. it's not very practical as a means of exchanging for goods. I mean, unless health froze over, it'd probably become pretty handy. But I mean, the truth of the matter is, so you're mining, and it's kind of interesting that Bitcoin uses the same terms. It kind of like gives it some tangible familiarity that this is like, wow, someone's got to mine it. So there's actually real work going into it. And uh, then you just have to wonder, is it secure enough that I could rely that it's going to be there when I need it? Can I, or how close is that to evaporating at any moment after I've invested hard fiat money into it or my precious metal empire into it? I mean, that's the part that's really scary because it's all living in a digital world.
Yeah. I kind of want to like, because this is a really important part of the conversation that I love having, which is that understanding Bitcoin is also understanding fiat currency and precious metals and how they kind of interact, right? They all have different like use cases. So what you're saying, like gold is a store of value, right? It's been a consistent store of that value for thousands of years. Bitcoin is trying to become a store of value, and many people are arguing that it's like digital gold because, compared to inflation of like fiat money, the value of Bitcoin has just skyrocketed. And so right now it does look like a great store of value, which is why many people are buying into it. But if you look at like the US dollar, right, that's not a great store of value. It decreases a lot. And especially since like the 1970s, when it wasn't backed by gold anymore, and we just printed it and there was no consequences to printing more and more of it, we're going to experience more and more inflation because there is no cap on the amount of US dollars that exist, right? At least with Bitcoin, we know that there will only be 21 million Bitcoin ever created and that will ever exist. Like that's something that we know for a fact. For gold, like we could keep mining, but it probably won't affect the price of gold too much. Like there's a cap on how much gold will exist because it's a finite resource. But for the US dollar, we can print them into like perpetuity, and at some point they will become worthless. Like that's basically guaranteed, and it's just a matter of time until that happens, especially when we've like printed trillions of dollars in the last 10 years and we don't think there's not going to be any consequences for that action. So just
I know that yeah, you're absolutely right. The truth about the whole dollar system and how they're able to play it in such a pyramid scheme for so long is a testament to like the global stranglehold of the international bankers' ability to manipulate currency, and how, when you got gangsters and you're dealing with casinos, and the casino has a casino in every major city, and you can't buy into it unless you're using our dollars. It's really amazing how far out into Funnyville we can go with how much money we can borrow. It's I don't quite, I don't quite get how we're supported by foreign countries and how they'll keep buying our treasuries. It's really, they've got to believe in it, right? I mean, I guess
Well,
there's no place else to look. I don't know.
well, catch this. There's a story here that 22% of the circulating USD was printed in 2020. Right? I mean, it's just accelerating. So basically, what I think is happening here is if you think of different global currencies as an armada of ships, the US dollar is the one that's sinking the slowest. So all the rats are leaving the other sinking ships and getting aboard USS dollar. And that's where we're at. But at the same time, like you mentioned before, that there's all this new institutional interest in Bitcoin. And I think a lot of that is bearing out because of threats to the dollar and how everyone's seeing that their purchasing power is decreasing. People with retirement funds are seeing it just dwindle away to where they can barely afford groceries anymore. It takes two members of a household to support a family and even have a hope of owning a home. And all these things that have changed in a couple generations. We look at things like we look at consumer price index to measure the inflation rate, and they've been changing things on there. Like it used to be that like to buy a steak, it costs this many dollars, and now they've changed it to like ground chuck. And now the CPI is being skewed because they're not comparing apples to apples anymore. So the whatever the CPI indicates, the actual inflation is worse than that. Now, some economists will say, well, deflation is no good either. But one of the best arguments I've heard against that is, well, do we know of any particular products that keep getting better year on year and cost less? Well, if you've ever bought a TV or a computer or a cell phone, you know that's exactly what happens in that space, because the efficiencies of manufacture are getting so good that you, even with an inflating dollar, you wind up spending less for a better product in a year. So does that mean that everyone perpetually holds off and never buys anything? No, because you need to use it now. Like you're paying a time penalty by waiting. So deflationary systems can in fact work, and we have demonstrations that they do. But by the same token, inflation, we're just, everyone's playing an international game of musical chairs to see who's going to find a seat last and who's going to fall off the edge into hyperinflation. And no one knows the exact model of how the economy works because people are very hard to predict. So it's just they're basically tweaking knobs of interest rates and all these other factors. And at some point, they're going to tweak something a little past the brink, and then it's going to accelerate and collapse, And yes, I know this is one of those things that like people have been saying this for probably 30 or 40 years is eventually going to happen. But I think we can tell that there are pain points that, the middle class and the poor of the country are definitely feeling that, we have so much more capacity and so much more manufacturing and everything, yet there are so many more people living below the poverty line. And we're fighting over if we should even keep up with inflation to increase the minimum wage. And that's not a livable wage, like if you're making minimum, you are not going to be living well, So those are just that's my take.
Yeah. Well,
interesting.
well, then the other thing is like, they're looking institutionally to pay everybody, give everybody a living, what are they calling it? It's like the British have the dole, living on the dole. What do they want to institute? They want to institute, they have a name for it. I forgot what they call it, but it's where everybody gets money, right? They just hand out money to every individual. What was that?
Universal basic income.
That's it. Universal basic income. Now it's become real. It's like, well, look, we're trying to do it right now with the stimulus packages. That's what that is. That's they're rolling it out. And so it's like the Ponzi scheme to keep it going, QE10. I mean, how much can you look? Let's all get some of the laughing gas while we still have it. We'll share it with everybody on the way out. And whatever it takes to keep the game going. And so imagine how far you can stretch it if you're doing it that way, and how that'll juice the economy. Look, I'm gonna give you all the credit you need until you choke. Let's just give you straight cash, and then you can go buy whatever it takes to jumpstart to keep the carburetors firing.
Here's the really interesting part about this. I love the connection. I mean, I've heard it before, but the minimum wage and keeping up with inflation, like I didn't really connect it to cryptocurrency before. I will say that another interesting part about this whole conversation is that during the pandemic, we saw the stock market shoot up, right? Like that was an interesting part of this whole thing, is that, oh, the economy is like not doing well, right? Like people are stuck at home, people are losing their jobs, but the stock market is going up. What's happening there? And I think for the first time, at least in my lifetime, like I realized that the stock market was not connected to the rest of the country, that Main Street and Wall Street were just so far removed from each other that you could have this artificial stock market increase because the government is pumping more money into that sector. That's what quantitative easing is, right? They're printing money, they're putting it into the economy, and then it's supposed to trickle down on the rest of us. And we know that from, empirically, that trickle down economics doesn't work. And finally, we got some like some scraps with the stimulus checks, months too late, in my opinion, like way too late did we start to like actually pay people to live. Like I'm surprised we haven't like done, you know, an uprising because of this horrible situation we're in and just the horrible response from the government. But somehow we're supposed to have faith and trust in the US dollar. Like, do you see how all these pieces are interconnected? And that for some reason, like we haven't, like as a general population, made the connection of the government isn't working for us. They're responding to the donors and the stock market. And that's who they care about, not us.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It's a testament though to how much the general population is willing to surrender. Just, you know, they're willing to like roll over. They don't have the fight in them, and that they're perfectly willing to wait for a handout when it comes, and that, you know, just old fashioned kind of the coalescence of groups that would march on Washington and like march on their city council, just do like what they're supposed to do. It's kind of like lost. And we haven't seen a revolt since, you know, the Capitol. That was a revolt, and for all intent and purposes, it's not a politically correct revolt, obviously, but there is hope that the population still has revolt in them. You know,
Well,
only got to
my
find a better cause.
my hope has been the whole theory of you don't just change something internally, you replace it with something better. And that's the hope I have for the crypto community, is that we can come up with an alternative to the dollar that's going to draw enough people in that, you know, because money, when you get to the fundamentals of it, money is this kind of fiction. You know, like, where's the value of money? Well, you can have money be like a precious metal that can be used for something, but mostly it's just an idea of I can exchange this for something else, and this is a measure of what something's worth, and that can be applied to anything. So we all have to, you know, if more people glom onto the fiction that Bitcoin has value, and I don't mean that that's putting it down by any means, but we've already established that there's a fiction that the dollar has value and that it's eroding constantly. So if there's it's easier to believe in a fiction of something that has a fixed number versus something that can infinitely be printed forever, you know?
Yeah, that's actually a concept I talk about in my book. Like the fiction that I like speak of is called a human institution, like a human system. And those are things that we as humanity have dreamt up, right? Democracy, governments, money, currency. These things aren't like, they're just ideas that we as a collective have decided are real things. Even rights and values, like those are things that we attribute some kind of worth and meaning to. And so if we can do that for the US dollar and other currencies, why can't we do it for Bitcoin and, you know, digital currencies that are made by the people for the people, right? Like that's the thing that gets me excited about cryptocurrency, is that when we first, like, you know, made government and democracy, those were the ideals. It was like by the people for the people, and that's exactly what this is. Like we can see who's making this, we can see what it is, and together we have to decide if we want to make this our, you know, primary form of currency. So
Right. Well, I guess that's the purpose of like this podcast too. It's like everybody who's talking sense about it and talking about it, it's kind of like the consciousness of that whole ideology gets manifest. And that, you know, I mean, the problem with Bitcoin too today is like, who's going to get into it? Like it left the building. I mean, you can get into it the way Daryl was talking, you know, invest, and that's not a bad way, especially if you have the understanding, enough information that say that'll tell you that this potentially can go to a, you know, 100,000. And so if I just start with a small investment and stay with it and watch it grow, at least I'll get some of it. You know, it's like, you want to join that party. It's not a bad investment. It's like the transfer of all your money from banks. Banks used to give you could buy T-bills and you can buy money market accounts, and you were getting, you know, maybe max out at 5% with a really good, you know, a really good bank would give you even more than that.
Like you
If
could
you
almost keep up with inflation that way.
Right. But see,
Yeah.
the problem was they took all that away. Wall Street took all that away, took that away from the banks and said, look, the only game in town is the stock market. So if you want to make any money, give us the bank, give us your bank account, put it in Wall Street, and let's grow it on Wall Street. And that way they can just clean you out too. It's not fair to, your grandparents that are their retirements in there, and the next thing they know, they just lost their retirement. It's unless because they don't know enough about how to safeguard it. It's in another world. Whereas I think Bitcoin is the third alternative to like anything else. And you're right. I mean, the fact that it's transparent. It's made by the people for the people. I mean, at least just getting that kind of mantra out is kind of what what you do with precious metals. Precious metals is like it's real, it's tangible. This is the most tangible thing digitally, right? If there's such a thing as tangible, it's at least the closest to precious metals. I mean, that you can, if you're going to gamble, I mean, even precious metals is a gamble, right? And that's tangible. So life is a gamble. And here, it's the more we know about Bitcoin, the better off you are. But the idea of investing in it in like a monthly, whatever it is, funny money that you can lose, that you put into that investment is probably better than putting it into anything else. Even though it looks like an impossibility at 56, 57,000, it's not too late. Because what do you think the potential of Bitcoin is, numbers wise?
May I soapbox for a little while?
I gotta open the door. Hold on. Go ahead. I'm gonna let you guys
sure.
talk it.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'll lead off on this one because one of the things I wanted to point out is that you don't necessarily have to be wealthy to start with Bitcoin, even now. So like when you see that the price is 50 something $1,000, you're like, I don't have that much money to throw around. But Bitcoin's divisible to 8 decimal places. So you can buy a small fraction of a Bitcoin and yeah, it won't say on your ledger that you have a whole Bitcoin. And there's this unit bias where people like whole numbers and everything. But if what you can afford is 1,000th of a Bitcoin, and then next week you can get another 1,000th or whatever, that's fine because if Bitcoin keeps on the trajectory it's on, you'll be doing pretty darn well. So don't be afraid of owning just a little bit. And I know it confuses the mind to see 0.000 whatever. And the thing I'll say also about Romeo indicating an upside. I would say that I've seen enough boom bust cycles that I kind of anticipate that we're in the middle of another bull market. And yeah, there are corrections along the way, but I won't be shocked if we see, multiples of where it's at now. Again, not investment advice, and don't put more in than you can afford to lose. But speaking of that, I also wanted to, I don't know if we should go into the whole GameStop investment thing.
I was actually wanted to do that. Yeah.
Oh, well, by all means, I won't go into it specifically, but I do want to bring up the idea of doing a short sale, which is if you short a stock, you have these kind of upside down odds you're playing. Like when, was it Melvin Investments was shorting GameStop? I think that's GameStop. I think that's their name. They were buying it at about $20 a share, right? And basically what happens when you're shorting is you borrow cash against the current value of a stock and you agree to repay 1 unit of that stock later on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you are buying the stock at $20, the most you can make is $20 if all the stock goes to zero, because you basically buy up all the stock for nothing and repay what you owe. The problem is that when you're doing a short, as was demonstrated, if the price shoots up to $400, you're now beholding, when the term is up, to buy stocks at $400, and that's how you're repaying, and you're losing $380 a share. So what that tells me is that shorting a stock like that has very limited upside of $20 you can make, very high, potentially unlimited downside if the price just skyrockets. I kind of look at putting money into something like Bitcoin as being almost the opposite of that. If you put $20 into Bitcoin, well, $20 is the most you can lose if it drops to zero because there's some big bug that blows the whole thing up tomorrow, right? So, okay, you're out $20. But if it keeps going like it's been doing, what's your upside? Where's the limit to that? And if it becomes the world's dominant currency, picture what everything looks like divided by 21 million. Your 0.001 Bitcoin makes you pretty wealthy at that point. So that's my soapbox.
Yeah.
Wow.
I have two
Yeah.
points to make on that. The first one, just to add on, like it's kind of crazy to extrapolate to the idea of like Bitcoin being like the world's reserve currency, right? It's hard to like even imagine it. But if you just like do that for like a second, then you realize that where we're at now is like extremely early. Like 50,000, that's kind of like we'll be talking about that in like, I don't know, 20 years. I was like, oh, I wish I gotten in when it was 50,000, right?
Yeah.
Now it's at 1 million plus, and it's basically like stable, like the price is stable. You can't really make more money anymore because pretty much everyone's in, like that's what happens with adoption. And so we're at the early adoption part of this curve, and until it reaches the mainstream at a global level, which will still take a long time, like the price is going to continue to go up because there is a limited supply, right? It's just supply and demand. It's not that complicated. And so I see 50,000 as like wow, like I can't believe it's in 5 digits, right? Like people every time there's like, oh, it was $1, like it was less than $1, and now it's 50,000. Well, try to think about it as, oh wow, it's only 5 digits, it's going to 7, right? Like that's the kind of framing. And when you think about it that way, then you're like, oh, when do I get in? But remember, there's not financial advice. I feel like I'm hyping this up too much, but dollar cost averaging is your friend in terms of trying to avoid a lot of the risk with the volatility that's associated with cryptocurrency right now. The second point I wanted to make was about GameStop stock. I think the stock market is a rigged game, and I think a lot of people are starting to see that now, because what you had happen was that Reddit, right, Wall Street Bets on Reddit, they saw that GameStop was being shorted out of existence. That's what they were trying. The hedge fund managers were trying to short it to zero, make it go bankrupt, and make their like Daryl was saying, like their $20 get rich quick scheme. That's what they were trying to do. And then all of a sudden, all these retail investors started buying GameStop, and then they stopped that from happening because they actually own Robinhood. Robinhood's customers are these hedge fund managers, not the retail investors that are investing on there. So if you use a product and it's free, then you are the product, right? You have to start thinking that way. I deleted Robinhood right after that happened, because I realized that Robinhood's not my friend.
No, I gotta do that next. I mean, yeah, I couldn't sell. You couldn't sell. I mean, I was up really big with Dogecoin, couldn't sell. I mean, it was like the most rotten thing you could do. And I'm still with them only because I'm trying to even out my bets. But I'm on my way out too. I'm gonna join what Daryl suggested with Gemini.
Am I mistaken, or can you not pull your crypto off of Robinhood? I've heard stories about that like you can buy Bitcoin and Dogecoin on Robinhood, but then you can't transfer it out. You can only sell it for dollars again, from what I understand. Yeah.
So this is really interesting. I didn't realize this until after I like bought a lot of Bitcoin in Robinhood. You're not actually buying Bitcoin when you buy Bitcoin in Robinhood. What you're buying is like a clone security that like kind of tracks the value of Bitcoin. And so you're not actually part of the Bitcoin blockchain. There's no like connection there. It's just, hey, I want to buy something that's going to increase in value, hopefully. But it's not actually a cryptocurrency. It's more like a cryptocurrency clone. And so if you sell it, you can sell it for money, but you can't like exchange it for another crypto because you never had crypto to begin with.
Yeah. And that's another problem that happens with the stock market, is that all the stocks are basically proxies to these paper notes, and they get duplicated. So sometimes if you try to add up all of the different places that are selling a particular stock, there are so many more shares than are actually on the books up for sale. is ridiculous. And that's another thing that can be cleaned up, that, you know, if in the future there were NFTs that were managing basically the stock market of the future, then the ledger would take care of who owns what, and you wouldn't have this vastly confusing, corrupt paper trail that allows people to cheat the system. And let's not even get into fractional reserve banking, right?
Like high frequency
That
trading.
might be a topic for another day. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I say, what have we gone here? We've gone over an hour. This has been pretty good. We've only scratched the surface. I say what we can do for this episode is let's just call this episode 1 and come back and revisit again and kind of see another look into it, you know, as it progresses, like in a month, and see what because I mean, I think we're living in, you're right. I didn't really put it into you know, the historical perspective is more clearer now than ever because of the advent of all these big corporations jumping in. That just makes it more real. It's kind of like consciousness taking its hold on Bitcoin, and when that happens, you need that kind of universal spontaneous kind of chain reaction to light things in motion for a better future. It's like now it's really manifest itself as a you know, as something at least we can take it on as more real than ever. And so the potential now, which was like guessing before, everybody who believed in it early on and stayed with it has parlayed all that consciousness into the next level. So if it's got this trajectory and it's got, like, once Elon Musk plugged in, it's kind of game over, right? It's like that should be enough spark to take us to Mars. And if that's not enough of a catalyst to get you on board, at least with what seems to be a good, you know, a good ride, I don't know what else is. I mean, even understanding that you're not out of the game at 57,000, that kind of remark you made, Ethan, is big, because the scope of where it's headed is, look, if you're talking about it becoming like a global currency, that's absolutely nuts. But that's the kind of thinking that you have to manifest, especially if you're in on it. And if you understand that there's no real competition, not honest competition, you know, it's a great conversation, especially about those that want to be, you know, that want to be informed about the potential for financial freedom, or at least some security.
I like the phrase you used there, because there's a typical phrase about the price of Bitcoin or any crypto: to the moon. No, let's make it to Mars.
Yeah, right.
Get your ass to Mars, right? Yeah, let's do that. I like it.
That's awesome.
All right. With that, you got any closing remarks there, Ethan?
Yeah, I just want to plug my book real quick. I know I've been talking about it this whole podcast, but I'm doing a pre-launch campaign starting at the end of the month. So please check out these links this way. Check out the links on my Zoom backgrounds. The best way you can reach me, I'm a very accessible person. If you have any questions about cryptocurrency, I'm very happy to answer your questions. I feel like the best value I can add to this community is to try to educate people, which is why I wrote a book. And yeah, please look out for my pre-sale campaign as well. Thank you for having me, Romeo. It's been great.
Absolutely. No, thanks for being a guest. And Daryl, you got any closing remarks?
Yeah, first of all, I can't wait to see the book. I'll be picking up a copy, I'm sure. Also, wanted to know if perhaps there, in the meantime, before the book comes out, are there any other books you would recommend, or any people to follow on Twitter that you think are very interesting?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like I've followed so many people. The Winklevoss twins seem to be the most active. The Winklevi. Who else? Vitalik Buterin. I always feel like he adds a lot of value in terms of like what's next coming in technology in this space. Book wise, I've read like the Bitcoin Bible has been really interesting. What's this other one I got? The Bitcoin Standard. This has been like a really helpful tool for my understanding of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. And there's a lot of great YouTube channels as well. Crypto Casey has been a really great tool for understanding a lot of the basics. So hopefully that helps.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'll put out there too that I haven't been personally pushing my views on Bitcoin too often because people I podcast with are not like into it as much as I am. So it's almost like pulling teeth to say like, hey, can we do a crypto episode? And I think like I did one with my podcast Incoherent Ramblings in 2014 about decentralization, which kind of covered all kinds of aspects of crypto and decentralizing all the things, you know. And that podcast is at iamrambling.com. And then myself, I've just been doing Let's Plays and some various videos at egos.live. So if anyone wants to check me out, it's there, but not a lot of crypto info, but I might add more as we go along. We'll see.
Yeah. When I told Daryl about this, and he like jumped to hell. Yeah. He goes, hey, maybe we can do a bunch of shows because, you know, I like talking crypto and I want to learn more about crypto. And
Mhm.
so, you know, maybe I'll find a third person we can bring into the conversation. I think it could be the beginning of something fun and get it out there and redo it again because the crypto story is just beginning and it's fun just to be, you know, to be in on the conversation. So expect this to be our this is our launch for a crypto series. So expect Ethan to be back and Daryl to be back. Congratulations on your book. I'm gonna stay up with that. The next gold rush. Now was it
How
now?
cryptocurrency will change everything.
Oh, how cryptocurrency, and it will, right? It will change everything. It's an
Mhm.
excellent title.
Can I get an
Daryl,
amen?
amen.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, preaching to the choir. All right, gentlemen. With that, I want to thank everybody for watching and listening to the Romeo Carey podcast. Live on the crest of the wave. That means consciousness is everything. I just did a root canal, by the way. I did a
Oh.
root canal without Novocaine. And do you know how you do it? You ride on the crest of the wave. That means the pain is back here, but I'm way up here. And if you're way up here, that means you're living in the moment. It wasn't a root canal, it was just a filling. But I did freak out the dentist. I don't think I could do it for a root canal. That'd be a little too much. Anyway, gentlemen, thank you. God bless. And we'll see you next time. All right, so I'll end this and hold on. Let's just stop the recording. We'll close this out in a sec. Where's our record here?
How long does it normally take?